like in The Exorcist, like they actually threw a priest down those fucking stairs. They were like, all right, well, we need at least one. Hopefully we can
Look,
get in that
Father,
one.
God's on your side. Good luck, bro.
Yeeting him into the sun.
Hey, hello, what's up, and welcome into this week's episode of the Geek Garage Podcast. This is episode number 73. Crazy to think that we're that high already, David.
Yes. Yeah, we are higher than giraffe pussy.
Nope, not well.
Higher than a hippie in a helicopter?
30% of us at least are.
Sure.
Yes, this is episode number 73, like I said, and 30% because we are joined by a guest this week who must hate herself. Keep coming back on this disaster of a show. But Miss Shauna Hoyt, who has been on the episode a couple of times before. Say hello, Shauna.
Oh, hello. How are you?
Nope, just hello. That's all you're talking about. Anyway, she has been on a few times, so we've decided to upgrade her status from guest, so ignore that I just said that, to nerd on retainer.
Yeah.
It's either nerd or geek on retainer. I mean, I guess geek would be more on theme,
Yes,
but
on brand, as it were.
Sure, yeah. But I figured, I just felt like guest.
It's kind of dismissive.
I mean, this is your fourth time on here?
Yeah.
Shauna? Yeah, so like, I feel like something a little bit more permanent than guest, but less permanent than like co-host.
Right.
But regardless, thank you so much for coming back on and agreeing to put up with our bullshit once more.
Definitely. That is a huge ask of anyone, and you've done it now 4 times. So for those of you that are uninitiated, she joined us previously last June when we did our Psycho Celebrates 60 episode, as well as the Friday the 13th watch along we did back in February, I think that was, or December. None of this matters. It all runs together. And then an earlier episode that was just about horror movies in general. So thank you again, Shauna, for joining us. We are continuing that theme that she has been now a nerd on retainer on each episode for, of horror. And of course, it's the spooky month. So,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So today we're going to be covering the inimitable 1974 film, The Texas Chain Saw Massacre.
Mr. $10 word.
Yes, and then you would put in the chainsaw sound effects here, I suppose. But
ring, 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 ring.
Not quite. But yeah, so a lot to talk about with that. Very excited. David, are you excited? No one cares. Shauna, are you excited?
I'm really excited.
Fucking asshole.
But before we get to that, we have a pretty big villain bracket brawl throwdown going on. David, tell everybody about that.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you to everyone that's been participating. This has been, I mean, between the bracket brawl and my own personal hashtag 31 Days of Horror that I am redoing this year. Of course, it's a little bit dissimilar to last year. Last year was all horror movies that I had already watched. This year, it's predominantly horror movies that have been suggested to me by our amazing fans and listeners. But yeah, the bracket brawl, Ted, I think that was technically your idea. Like, I don't even fucking remember what my original idea was. Excuse me. And then, like, I told that idea to you, and you were like, why don't we have like a bracket where like they quote unquote, face off or compete with each other?
Yeah, I think the original idea was to just do one big poll and let people do write-ins or what have you. Like, we were going to think up a few and then leave it open so people could do write-ins. And I was like, it would be really kind of fun and in my opinion, at least amusing, because I find stupid, kitschy shit amusing sometimes. Like, let's do it tournament style.
Yeah.
And I don't care what anybody else thinks. That's still amusing to me. So
yeah, someone actually tried to step to me and be like, bro, it's not even March. I was like, what the fuck are you even talking about?
Yeah, because as we all know, tournaments only happen in the month of March because there's nothing but college basketball. Right. I'm still betting on football and baseball, so we'll get back to you, Mr. College basketball person. All right, the degenerate gambler has spoken.
Right. But no, just like Ted said, it's been going really great. Like we've gotten a lot of listener and fan interaction as far as comments. Like I was kind of under the impression that I would just like post the daily poll, for the two villains that face off against each other, and then people would vote and then move on with their lives. But like people are actually taking time out of their day to back up their votes with some logic and reasoning, and I'm like, people are fucking bringing it. And like I was Ted, we were actually talking about this before we hit record, that someone actually like swayed my vote in another direction. Like the poll today was Pennywise versus Pinhead, and my knee-jerk reaction was to vote for Pennywise, but instead decided to go with Pinhead because this person was like, yeah, Pennywise, he kind of gets off on like people having fear and fearing him in particular, and Pinhead, like, he doesn't give a fuck about anyone. And I was like, oh, okay, well, good point.
Yeah, that's an interesting consideration. I'd have to really think about it, but it's not a bad argument.
Yeah,
It's definitely it's a very good argument, actually. So
right.
kudos to that person.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about this for just a few more minutes, but like I wanted to kind of start it out by saying, I did kind of make this clear-ish after the fact. When I initially posted like the full bracket, like the full 16 seed bracket or what have you, I don't think I mentioned that it was all randomized. Like I just typed all of the names into like a bracket generator or name like randomizer or whatever, and it just randomly paired up everyone together. And then I kind of took a quick look at it. I was like, yeah, that looks pretty good. The pairings don't look too off. And then Ted, I showed it to you. I sent it over your way and you gave it the okay, and that's two sets of eyes on it. So I was like, okay, well, it
Well,
must
let me
be.
stop you right there because I pretty much phoned it in. When you were like, "This is what it is," I was like, "Cool, post it. I do not care. I'm done talking about this."
All right, well, good to know. But either way, it did have two sets of eyes on it, and people found something to complain about. Naturally,
As they
they
do.
yes, the main issue was just the quote unquote odd pairings of the face offs. I think the one that got the most complaints
The Jigsaw.
was yeah, it was the Freddy versus Ghostface.
Oh.
That got a little bit of quote unquote backlash, but really not too much. It was mainly from a couple people. I think they were just a little heartbroken that Ghostface didn't win.
Ghostface
I
was
mean,
never gonna win anything. He's a teenager, literally. In the first. Anyway, moving on. David, go ahead.
right. No, so Freddy won that by a pretty big landslide. And then Leatherface versus Jigsaw, that wasn't as much of a landslide victory. Jigsaw did put up a little bit of a fight, and I did vote for Jigsaw, but he, of course, fucking lost. I guess people were more self-assured about Leatherface being able to hit either a handicapped old man or a fucking doll riding a tricycle, whatever form he decides to take in this particular fighting instance. So I don't know, but yeah, but yesterday that was the most. I don't know, Ted. What would you call it? The pairings were equally matched. I don't know how you'd put it. There was
They were the most evenly matched, is how I would put it.
okay. Well, cool. Thanks for fucking clarifying that for me. So, and that's mostly thanks to you, because after it was pointed out to me that the Leatherface versus Jigsaw didn't make any goddamn sense, I was like, fine. So I handed it back off to you, and I was like, will you take more than 2 seconds to reconsider the pairings?
Yeah.
And you were like, fine, I guess I'll pull my weight. And that was my good Ted impression. You don't want to hear my bad Ted impression. But you came back just like a few minutes later with the pairings, and then I went into Photoshop. I redid the bracket and I posted back up on Facebook. Like, okay, first of all, Jason won. Second of all, here is the rematches of all this. Or no, that was right after Leatherface
Leatherface
versus
won, and
Jigsaw.
then here's the rematches.
Yes.
Yeah. I wish
People
that we
were.
go ahead.
I was just gonna say people were much happier with the revision. So good job, Ted.
Yeah, well, I don't care. Shauna, do you have any thoughts on the poll?
So
Go.
I've been following it. I have, I think, only voted a couple of times. I might have voted all 4 times. I'm not sure, but I thought the pairings, even the ones that didn't match up completely evenly, like what you would think Michael Myers versus Jason Voorhees would be. You have to take into consideration the villain, the bad guy, monster, whomever it is, and who they terrorize and how they terrorize. Because I may not be as afraid of somebody like Pennywise as I would Pinhead, but if I was 10 years old and I was going to get sucked down a storm drain and eaten by a killer clown, I would think that Pennywise would just win hands down. So,
Mhm.
Right.
I think people need to take into consideration the victims and how they victimize, because I think that would make a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, if only we were smart and had thought of that. Thank you. This podcast is over. Thank you for joining us, Shauna. You're dead to us. No, I think that is a really good point. The point I raised to David when he was telling me that everybody was upset, I was like, look, Leatherface versus Jigsaw in a classic tournament style is like a 1 seed Leatherface versus a 16 seed play-in winner Jigsaw.
Right.
So it makes perfect sense, but whatever, we'll fix it because people don't understand how fucking tournaments work. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. We're moving on
I,
past that. I'm
I
glad that
mean,
people are enjoying it, even though we had to do it a second time.
hey, at least we only got 2 matches into it before we were, we decided to.
Inundated with negativity.
Right. I mean, like, God forbid someone use their brain and be like, okay, well, Leatherface and Jigsaw, they're not really in the same like subgenre of horror. So let me use my brain to figure out like who could outsmart who, or who would like have the element of surprise, or blah blah blah.
Right.
Like no one really wanted to do that. They just wanted to go with like their knee jerk reaction, but their knee jerk reaction um was blunted by this idea that they shouldn't be paired up against each other. And I was like, come on, use some creativity, people. But
It's just for fun. This is just for
yeah, it,
for fun.
it ain't that deep, fam, as Ted likes to
Impact.
tell
That
me,
is what I would say.
like on a daily basis, where I'm like, how about this? And you're like, hey, how about you shut the fuck up? It's like work hours right now. I'm trying to work, dipshit.
Well, I mean, not in so many words, but
Sure. I mean, that's just me putting words in your mouth. But anyways,
we
yeah,
spent too
so
much time talking about this.
uh,
Really.
whatever. I
Yeah.
think it's the appropriate amount of time.
Anyway.
But yeah, today's poll was Pennywise versus Pinhead. And the last time I checked, Pinhead was pretty much dominating. Pennywise did have a couple votes, I think maybe 4 or 5, but Pinhead had like 21, 22, I think.
I mean, look, I'm gonna go with the super goth over the dude who gets owned by a bunch of 12-year-olds literally every time.
Right.
Yeah.
Pinhead looks like an extra from a Sisters of Mercy music video. There's nothing about that that's bad, okay? Let's get that straight, number one. Number two,
Right.
once again, and I cannot stress this enough, owned by 12-year-olds. Like, just
Right.
fucked up, fam.
Yeah. I don't know. Shauna, what did you vote in this one yet? Or
So I did.
okay.
Now I badly want. I would. My favorite is obviously Pennywise.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, I know
I.
you're a big Stephen King fan.
Yeah, and he's a scary guy, and I think about being 12 or whatever, and dealing with him, encountering him. I did end up voting for Pinhead because I did like that one fan's or the one commenter's argument about
Hmm.
that he's not afraid of anything. Like he literally doesn't have a weakness except for his box.
Right.
And so that kind of convinced me too. Um, but Pennywise, he'd be my emotional vote. He'd be the one I would want to win.
Right. Yeah. I feel like I've had that instance for every single one of these so far. Like I think there's been one that has been like a clear cut, like, oh yeah, that's easy. But for the most part, like Michael Myers versus Voorhees, like that one was super difficult.
Yeah,
Like I think I took the entire day before I casted my vote. I was like, I love them both. Like, can
it's
they both
true.
win?
Yeah.
Um,
Or
and
both
then
die or both not.
sure, both continue to be undead, I guess. um, but yeah, I think we chatted about the bracket brawl and the polling and the commenting for a decent amount of time. Do you guys want to get to the topic at hand?
Yeah.
Yes.
So much excitement on that end.
Yes.
It's a movie about teenagers being killed by, a guy who wears people's skin. It's hard to be excited about that. It's frankly horrifying.
I mean, sure. You raise a decent point. Um, so this movie actually is celebrated its
Are you doing
something
math?
anniversary.
46th, I believe.
46th, yeah. Um, I think it was actually just like yesterday, the day before.
It was
I
pretty recently. It was the anniversary of its festival premiere. Pretty recently, in the
let's
last week
see.
or so.
Yeah, the date that I think it was IMDb or Google had is October 11th, 1974. So yeah, that's either the theatrical premiere or what you say the
Festival
festival.
premiere. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's pretty much the reason why we decided to talk about this movie, the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, other than the fact that it's an awesome slasher horror and it's kind of a trailblazer, right? Like almost one of the first of its kind. Like, guys, can you think of any other like slashers or something similar to this that came before it?
I mean, personally, yes.
Okay,
Depending on how loose you want to go with the terminology or the definition of slasher, I mean, you could consider something like Psycho a slasher in some ways.
sure. Yeah.
But I mean, Peeping Tom from 1960, Blood and Black Lace from 1964. That's about a masked killer killing models. I mean, those are both pretty. I think those are both pretty tried and true, quote unquote, slashers.
Right.
Italy had the whole yellow film movement, so
Okay.
that was really more of a '70s thing, but it had kind of started up, in the late '60s.
Late 60s, yeah.
Yeah, it seemed like I don't know. Is hillbilly horror like a technical subgenre of horror? Like, do either of you guys know?
I mean, I always thought it was.
Okay, like because that like term subgenre name or whatever you want to call it popped into my head the other day as I was typing up these notes. And I was like, hillbilly horror, like that's not something cool that I would like be able to come up with on my own. I feel like I've actually heard
Yeah.
that before, and I think it gets referred to like by movies like this and The Hills Have Eyes and
Yeah.
like all of Rob Zombie's movies. They're horror movies, usually slashers that take place in like the deep south.
In the
Yeah,
middle of nowhere.
someplace
Yeah,
off the beaten path.
Mhm.
right.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, The Hills Have Eyes is basically directly inspired by this film, so I mean
Right.
that's going to be kind of your 1-2 punch. But I think that's a fair point. Yeah.
Yeah. Shauna, so we've heard the least from you thus far. Do you remember the first time you saw this movie? Was it quite a while ago? I know you've seen or when you were growing up and your dad exposed you to a lot of horror. Was this one of the movies that ended up getting brought up pretty early on?
Yes, I can't remember the first time I saw this particular movie, but it was definitely sometime junior high, high school. It was definitely before
Okay.
college. I think I was a bit older before I was able to see these kinds of horror movies.
Sure.
Just because there's so much, well, there's not that there's not a lot of like sex and stuff in, any of the other
Right.
movies that we watch,
Right, but that's like sex,
right. This is like mutilation and I don't know, like
It
rape and
Yeah,
so
and cannibalism.
cannibal.
Yeah, this movie's got everything: drugs, sex, cannibals.
Right, exactly. So I'm sure I was a bit older, but I mean, I've seen it several times over the years. Although I had to rewatch it recently because it
Mhm.
had probably been about 10 or 15 years since I'd seen it.
Oh wow. Okay.
So because I've seen there's so many other movies that are part of that franchise that
Right.
you get occupied with number three and all of the remakes and reboots and everything. So
Mhm.
you know, um, it had been a long time since I saw this version.
Okay, that's cool. Ted, do you remember when you first saw this movie?
Um, I think I was probably like 16.
Okay.
If memory serves, and I've been hitting the head a lot of times, so I could be wrong on this, but if memory serves, I rented the VHS from the library.
Hell yeah.
Wow.
I
And
rented Pulp Fiction from the MTSU library on VHS.
yeah, oh the two boxer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what it was.
Yeah, if memory serves, that's where I rented this from. Although it may have been like Hollywood Video or something, I can't remember for sure.
Sure.
But I'm pretty sure it was the library because it would have been free.
Right.
And you know, this movie was already kind of like legendary,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
To
Mhm.
horror aficionados. So I think I pretty well knew about it, but I still don't think I was like prepared for it. If that makes sense.
Yeah. That
um.
makes perfect sense.
So yeah, it was just wild, man. But yeah, it was not something I was even as a kid who watched a lot of horror movies. This one was just like there was something different about it.
Mhm. Right. Yeah, I didn't watch this movie for the first time until maybe like 2017, 2018, so it was fairly recent. We've had this discussion many times on the podcast, but I didn't grow up with horror as it wasn't as part
I'm
uh,
sorry.
oh no,
It's
it's
terrible.
okay.
I feel badly for you. I know.
Wow,
I
got
mean,
heavy.
hey, I mean, like I was a fan of the genre, but it wasn't um I don't know, like I didn't really seek it out as I do now. I guess I just had to grow into it.
Mhm.
But yeah, I did kind of like I did appreciate it the first time I watched it, but that's about as much as I could say for it. Like I was like, okay, cool. Like now I see where Rob Zombie got literally fucking all of his ideas from.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a big talking point. Sorry to cut you off, but that was a big
No.
talking point when House of a Thousand Corpses came out. I was like, this is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but worse
Right,
in like
yeah.
every respect.
Definitely. Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, like, I had a lot of appreciation for it, but as far as me actually liking the movie and whatnot, or I was like, "Sure, I guess." Uh, I did watch it in an odd setting. I was at work at the time, and we were kinda, like it was an office job, but we were since, like, work from time to time got a little slow, and if there was no work to be done, then we literally had nothing to do, so they allowed us to watch Netflix or whatever. And so I was like, oh yeah, like Shauna, that was actually around the time where our two families started hanging out. Like we
Yeah.
first met around that time, we started hanging out a lot, and so that's when horror really like kicked up in my life, in a major way. And so I think you had just recently recommended it, or you berated me like Ted likes to do for not seeing it, and I was like, all right, well, this'll get her off my back for like 2 seconds until she finds the next movie that I have not seen that I need to see right away.
Yes, yes.
But yeah, I recently rewatched this movie. I think it was just last week, and I have a brand new appreciation for it, and I actually really really like it. Like I I like it now. So I mean, I don't know if that like does anything for you, if that like means okay, well, we won't stab David in the neck today. Like we'll save our stabbing for his shitty opinions on another day when he, sticks his, head in the sand or whatever. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I do like it. So
It's an amazing film. I mean, it really is. From even the acting I think is phenomenal. Especially when you compare it to a lot of the more contemporary horror movies that we
mhm,
see that are just lame and ridiculous. And I think like, how are these people actors? There's no way they actually paid them to do this. I
right.
can't believe I paid somebody to watch this. I mean, it's just and the acting was phenomenal. The cinematography was phenomenal, and it didn't rely on I know we've had CGI discussions, but it doesn't
Mhm,
rely on that. It doesn't rely
right.
on that kind of technology.
Oh yeah, there's
um
like none of it in there.
no.
Like I
And
mean, CG was like in its infancy.
right.
In this was the 70s, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, so
74.
Yeah.
CG wasn't even like a thing in
Oh.
1964, let alone for the budget that they had for this movie.
Right, even if it were, they wouldn't have been able to afford it.
Yeah, like in The Exorcist, like they actually threw a priest down those fucking stairs. They were like, "All right, well, we need at least one. Hopefully,
Look,
we can
look,
get in that
Father,
one."
God's on your side. Good luck, bro.
Yeah.
Yeeting him into the sun. I don't know why I had to bring up The Exorcist. I recently rewatched that one too. Um, but yeah, no, Shauna, you brought up a interesting point about the acting. I I too thought the acting was great, and for multiple reasons. One, I mean, just for acting's sake, but also like this was shot in a month, I think, like 4 to 6 weeks maybe, and it was during like one of the hottest summers of all time in Texas at the time. And so like, you see them like in the van or like walking around just like sweat dripping off of their faces. And the at the dinner scene where she's like freaking out and she's like strapped to the chair, like you gotta think like how much of that was acting and how much of it was like heat exhaustion, just
Right.
like because like they apparently didn't have any ventilation or AC or anything inside that house. So like all of that food, like that was not prop food, it was real food that they set out, and like it just rotted instantly because of lack of like um cool air and things that you need to keep food relatively
From
fresh,
rotting, yeah.
right? And so yeah, I like I said, it was interesting that you brought up the acting, because I thought that given the circumstances, that the acting was pretty damn incredible.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
I
and
don't.
they're oh, sorry, go ahead, Ted.
No, I was gonna say I don't know that I agree that the acting was good necessarily. Like, I think that they were believable characters, and I think that was aided by the fact that they were for the most part, a bunch of nobodies. At least in terms of like named actors, there's still people obviously, but
Right.
a bunch of like no name actors
Yeah, it was basically like a
cast
Clerks
from like
casting.
Midland, Texas.
Yeah.
So I think that they were believable, whereas it wasn't necessarily good acting. Like, oh, that's a good accent. Like that was just them talking. So I don't
Right.
know that the acting was great necessarily. I just think that it was very inspired, I guess, casting.
Sure. Yeah, I can see that. I
Well,
mean,
and
that's
I agree with that too, although I think that these characters, this is one of my points for later, but they are all of these scenes are so mundane, right? Like
Mhm.
these are normal things that people do all the time, and yet they the characters are they're almost going crazy.
Right.
They're like maniacs, and I mean, even the ones that aren't killing are maniacs, and
Mhm.
the madness that surrounds the film. And I think it's got to be hard, I would think, to act like that, to and have it be believable.
Right.
The madness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, especially with Sally.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point.
Yeah. So I read somewhere that and I think this came up during the Psycho episode. We were talking about some Ed Gein influences, like,
Mhm.
and how he's influenced like a bunch of other movies. Well, apparently this was another Ed Gein influenced film.
Yes.
It's I know it's like loosely based, like it's not like a retelling of the quote unquote Ed Gein story or what have you, but it's certain parts of it are based off of things that happened with him and his situation. um
Yes.
so
Well, he collected body parts. Geen did.
right.
He created things from them, like lamps and different pieces of artwork, and for him, artwork, mementos and things like that. So he actually used body parts as like an artistic medium, and in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, they do as well. I mean, you see it as part of the decorations in the house.
Right.
It's on the walls. They have skin on the walls, and obviously there's the mask of skin, but there are
Right.
body parts throughout the house, and they're more celebrated, and so almost like artwork,
Hmm.
admired. So I feel like there's a pretty strong resemblance between what Geen was doing and what this family was doing. So
Right. Yeah, it's fucked up.
Yeah.
I like it. um yeah. Yeah, sorry. I just Shauna, when you mentioned the lamp or lampshade, like it cracked me up. I mean, one, because that's fucking funny just in general, but two, like uh I saw a shirt the other day. I think it was a homemade shirt that I saw on Facebook, but it just said it had a picture of Ed Gein and then right next to it a picture of a lampshade, and it was like, you'd make a terrific lampshade.
you should make that shirt.
Yeah, I should. I don't want to owe any copyright money to the Ed Gein estate, but if that's a thing, Ted, do you
Yeah,
know if
something
that's a
tells me
thing?
that he didn't have a family that's going to sue you.
No,
Yeah.
he probably ate them all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or shame
Um.
them. Shame them. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Um. Uh. What else? What else? What do we got in our notes here?
Well, I know you mentioned the heat.
Yeah. My God, the heat.
Yeah, and that was kind of the first thing when I rewatched this the other day that I thought about. I was like, that's such a big, it's almost like a character in and of itself in the
Yes.
film. And like the movie sort of just settles in immediately, like a really thick humidity,
Right.
which, we're familiar with here in the South. And of course, in
Mm-hmm.
Texas, in parts of Texas, they have a lot of humidity as well. So it's like, it just settles in and it's like oppressive. It's like, it's thick around you and it's uncomfortable. And so like you immediately understand like their circumstances as far as that goes.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like they already have what, like, is it 4 or 5 people in that van?
Yeah, there's already
Right.
5 people in the van.
Yeah, and then they pick up the hitchhiker, and you're like, first of all, why? And second of all, like, why? Like, you have like 5 people in that fucking van. Like, you really want to, invite a weirdo hitchhiker into your
Well, and
van?
they
And
talk about it. The character, one of the characters in the van says, where are we going to fit this guy? And they joke and
Right.
say like, oh, put him next to Franklin, and they do,
Hmm.
and then he cuts him. But, and then they're
Right.
talking about how stinky he's going to be. And like, he's been out here all day on these like slaughter farms, like he's going to smell. And
Right.
so you feel it. You feel
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, and they did a really good job of like prefacing that whole scene where they pick him up and then the subsequent interaction with that brief discussion right beforehand where they talked about the slaughterhouses. And I think it was what's the guy's name in the wheelchair again?
Franklin.
Franklin. Yeah, I think it was him that started talking about how they used to how they used to kill the cattle by like strangling them or something,
They
Killing
would
but
with
the
a hammer.
bludgeon them.
that's right, yeah. But they moved on to that like hydraulic gun thing that shoots him in the head with a steel rod, kind of
Hmm.
the thing from No Country for Old Men. um and so yeah, like you kind of have like the idea of the real gritty behind the scenes ness of a slaughterhouse, like fresh in your mind. And then you get to this point of like picking up this hitchhiker who is basically coming home from the day, or for the day,
Right.
from the slaughterhouse, and you're just like, yeah, this is not a good idea.
Well, and then they say to him, like, hey, so you don't, smack them in the head or beat them in the head until they die anymore. And he's like, oh, no, we do. That's the better way to do it, and
Right.
it's like, get him out of there. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I think they do a great job setting it up, setting you up, and then, and setting the scene. And then they pick up this guy anyway. It's like, what? What? But
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, that whole segment, like leading up to him being picked up, and then the first part of his ride with them before it gets really off the rails, like you said, with the knives and everything. It it really sets up the movie, and it
Yeah.
really gives you a lot of background without being super obvious about it. At least
Right.
I think,
Yeah, I agree.
because he talks about like, oh no, hitting him with the hammer is the better way, and sometimes you got to do it more than once, and then you see that happen later in the film,
Right.
and
Right.
it kind of leads you to believe where he's like, this may just be like me reading too deeply into things. Maybe it ain't that deep, fam, but um, where he mentions like, it put a lot of people out of work, and the hammer was the better way. So I kind of thought that in some way, and maybe again I'm reading too deeply into this, I kind of thought that in some way, like basically this was the downfall of their family once the slaughterhouse changed, and like
Yeah.
because later they talk about how their grandfather was the best at using the hammer. um I felt like that was kind of the beginning of their down, maybe not the beginning of their downward spiral into like, you know psychopathy and cannibalism, but
Right.
just kind of like almost setting them up as like tragic characters in a way.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I agree with you. I think that, this family is incredibly resourceful, right? I mean, they're eating what they kill, they're decorating with what they kill, and they're continuing their work, right? Even at home. So,
Right.
it's the perfect like bring your work home kind of thing, and give yourself purpose. Even grandpa gets purpose.
Right. They would be fantastic coronavirus soldiers. Like, ain't no Rona getting in there. Like, Rona, like, takes one look and being like, I'm the fuck out,
That's
okay?
actually where Rona originated.
Right. There was no bats involved. It
Right.
was hammers instead, and
Yeah,
flesh.
hammers,
Hammers and flesh.
and cows. The cows.
Yeah. I can't remember who it was. One of you mentioned like it's just weird that they picked up a hitchhiker, which I agree, but I think that's mostly a product of like different generations.
Yeah.
For
The one
sure.
thing I thought watching this movie this time that I kept thinking is the 70s must have been crazy different than the
Yeah.
times that I think we're all about the same age and the times we grew up in, because like they're picking up hitchhikers, which I was always told never do,
Hmm.
and now I know why. And then like later they go to find gas at this stranger's house, and when nobody answers the door, I'm just like, fuck it, I'm out. There's nobody here. Instead, this dipshit is just like, I'm gonna just walk into these
I know.
people's house. So like,
Yes.
what the fuck was happening in the 70s? That's what I want to know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. it really was one of those times where I guess things were maybe a little bit more innocent. Some front doors got left unlocked more often than not, or more often than they do now. Hitchhikers were being picked up. It's just,
It was a more innocent time where you could just bludgeon a man to death with a hammer in the privacy of your own home, like God
right,
intended.
yeah, and get away with it with
Get away with it.
relatively no issues. Relatively speaking,
Yeah,
little to no issues.
a few issues.
I think Ted's right on. I mean, you do have to put the film into context because obviously, like, we wouldn't be picking up a strange hitchhiker in like 100-degree weather. But I don't know, maybe if I'm in the middle of nowhere and I'm like smoking with a bunch of my friends and we're in a van and
Right.
we're like high on life or whatever, and we want to pick some random guy up to give him a lift. I don't know. I mean, but yeah, it was a totally different time. I mean, back when our parents were hitchhiking and I mean, not
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
we do
Well,
now.
Shauna, I will come to your funeral after you do that. It's unreal.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, you screen the guy now, right? You don't you talk to him from outside of the van, you get some information from him, take a look at his driver's license. I mean, you don't just like let him in the van,
Look,
but
I try not to be a judgmental prick, but if I see a dude that looks like that on the side of the road with a giant scar on half of his face, carrying around what looks like a decapitated possum as
yeah.
a fanny pack, I'm speeding up. I'm sorry. It is what it is. Okay.
That's
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, yeah. I could see that. I could see
Yeah,
that.
that's fair. You guys want to talk about like Leatherface in particular?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's the guy in this.
The guy,
Yes.
yes.
The guy. And the very first time I heard of Leatherface was I was watching Idle Hands. This is totally random, but like it was that scene where I think it was Seth what's his name? Not Seth with the orange hair. Or
Seth
the,
Green.
Rogan or
yeah,
oh,
Seth Green. Yeah, and he gets the electric, I guess, turkey cutter, and he's like, "Look at me, I'm Leatherface." Um, and that was the very first time I heard of Leatherface, and I was like, well, I don't get that reference. Someone had to explain it to me. But anyways, yeah, Leatherface. He's got a couple different masks, right? He's got
yeah.
he's got the main mask we're pretty much all familiar with, but then he's got a mask for like when he's being like a housewife, I guess, for the fitting term of that time is, he like has his apron, right?
Right.
And then he has another one, but I can't remember. Shauna, do you remember what the third mask is?
I don't.
Okay.
I know it's it's hard to express emotion with one mask, right? So I feel like
Right.
it makes sense that he would have several for how perhaps how he was feeling at the moment or the kind of day he was going to have. But no, I don't. I don't remember what the other mask was.
Yeah. Yeah. I bet Vin Diesel watched this movie and he's like, dude needs 3 masks. I just need one, baby.
Yeah. I think it's the first time I watched it, I don't think I noticed the mask changed. Probably because I was so busy being like, what the fuck out of my brain.
Right.
And then I saw it this time, and I don't, I, I don't know that it's necessarily to better display emotion, although I don't think that's wrong
Hmm.
necessarily either. Um, I think it's just sort of maybe it's not emotion, but I think that that's how he feels he's supposed to look or what he's supposed to do. Like,
Right. Like he's
Self-expression.
assuming that role.
right, like that's his task or his role, like you said. Like
Right.
when we first see him, he's down in the slaughterhouse, the basement slaughterhouse, I guess, and it's kind of just like the work almost mask, I guess. Like it's pretty plain. It's not,
Right.
And then when we see him serving food or attempting to, it's got makeup. It's almost like, and he's dressed up. Also,
Hmm.
I don't know, he's out of his
Yeah.
work clothes,
Right.
which is a very like traditional deep South thing, where
Hmm.
you dress up for family dinner, especially
Yeah.
when you have guests, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. He was in like heels, I think.
yeah, so it
Maybe.
makes a lot of sense in that aspect, or it lends a lot of credence, I guess I should say, to that kind of thought process of this is how I'm supposed to look for this instance or this circumstance.
Right. Yeah, one thing that one little trivia factoid that I thought was super interesting was apparently um what's his name?
Gunnar Hansen.
Yeah. He he was given some artistic liberty and I don't know what do you call it?
License.
Sure, yeah, license to kind of experiment with the character, kind of give it its own personal backstory and um, how he would personally interpret this character. And I think both him and the director kind of came to this agreement that he would probably in real life be, on some level mentally retarded or mentally handicapped. And so he ended up going to, this is the 70s, mind you. So they, instead of like taking care of them, because families didn't really have a firm understanding of how to take care of like physically and mentally handicapped people, they were sent to like a hospital or a living arrangement that's like I don't want to say a psych ward, but it's like that situation. And so he would go there and visit with mentally handicapped people, and just to observe. And it wasn't just like one of those acting things where you like kind of submerge yourself or submerge yourself within that culture that you're trying to represent on screen. It was so that when he inevitably had to depict it on screen for the movie, he did it in the most respectful way possible. And coming from a family that has a lot of mental illness, and my brother Ben, he's in a wheelchair, like I really appreciated that, especially given the time period, like the 70s. Like retarded was a word thrown around a lot uh, at this point in time. So yeah, I don't know. That was just a little trivia tidbit that I thought was pretty interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that I mean it served his character well, at least.
Right.
And I think it gave him some credibility without being silly or foolish or over
Yeah.
exaggerated, which some of the characters do end up looking that way.
Hmm.
But Leatherface, I feel like is, I mean, taking out what he does, okay, the whole like killing and maiming and dismembering and whatever else, he's actually kind of a normal guy. I mean, he seems relatively put together. I don't know, especially comparing him to some of the other characters. So I thought he was it served him well. Whatever research he did, it served him well. So
Yeah.
Yeah, something that jumped out at me watching the film recently is that Leatherface is like terrified of the kids
Right.
or
Yeah.
like the
Like,
strangers.
yeah, there's a scene where he like you can see him jump as one of them screams.
Yeah, I think it's the first woman that goes in after she like follows your boyfriend in. He's like rah and like jumps and then runs back to get something, um,
Right.
and is like terrified of it. And then after he disposes of her, he's like he runs and checks another room to like to make seemingly to make sure that it's handled. There's not somebody else waiting around the corner,
Right.
which I thought was a really interesting like way to play it, because so many subsequent films like this, and even subsequent films in this franchise, they turn Leatherface into like an unstoppable killing machine, a
right.
la Jason.
Yeah.
And like, okay, that there's a place for that, but I thought this was an interesting wrinkle where it's not just like unstoppable death machine. It's like again, almost like a tragic character. Now, I'm not saying we should be sympathetic to the guy who's chopping people up with a chainsaw,
Right.
but they do try to play it a little different than the average horror villain.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot of what makes this movie so special. As a movie and a horror movie is, he's like a humanized villain. Like Ted, like you said, it's not necessarily normal to cut up people with a chainsaw. However, he just has a more personable touch to him than like Freddy or Jason or Michael. Like you know, they're all basically undead.
Right.
Like you said, unstoppable killing machines. But this guy, like, he, as he's chasing Sally with the chainsaw, like, they go into that house, and as she's going up the stairs, she turns back to see if he's still following her, and at that moment he's walking through the door, and she like screams because she's scared. You see him like jump back. He's like, oh. But then, of course, persistent as always, like he, follows her up the stairs. So yeah, Ted, I totally agree and understand what you're saying about him just having that more personable touch to him.
Yeah, that said, I think that the first shot of him and that first kill is like horrific.
It's, yeah.
Because he's just like, the guy runs in, he trips up that little ramp, and then as he looks up, that's when Leatherface first appears, and it's shot in a way it's like back and forth between the characters, so you don't get like that long lingering shot on Leatherface at first, and then there's just that like grotesque thud of the hammer,
Right.
and then the like shriek of the sheet metal door, and then the slamming of it that just sounds weird in some way. Like, I don't think they augmented the sound to it necessarily, but it's just like the finality of it. You're just like, what the fuck? Like, the movie starts out crazy, right?
Oh,
Within the
yeah.
first 5-10 minutes, there's a guy who's cut himself, cut somebody else, lit something on fire in the van. So like, it starts out at 10, and then you see that, and you're just like, what the fuck? What has happened? Like, how did this happen? Like, who allowed this?
I'm moving out of Texas.
Well, yeah, I mean, it happens so quickly, and like you said, there's this like kind of like thud, like you said, finality, and he's gone. And it's like,
Yeah.
where did he go? He went behind the door. Like, what's he gonna do? What's gonna happen? And you almost want to say like, wait, hold on a second.
Yeah.
So
It's not like it's grotesque, right? Like, it's gruesome, but it's not super gory. There's some blood, but
right,
it's not like, a lot of other films that really revel in that.
Yeah.
And then there's just that kind of like, it does leave you wanting more in a way, in a kind of a weird way, because a lot of films, particularly slasher films, that really revel in the kills. Like, that's what people like. They really revel in that cruelty. Whereas this was just like slam on the head, slams the door, which really goes with the theme of like it being really, Toby Hooper, the director, said he's like, the film's about meat, basically.
Yeah.
right.
I texted David this, and I was like, this is basically the most effective
PETA commercial.
Vegetarian.
Yeah, I was like, this is like somebody gave PETA enough money to make a snuff film.
But
Is what it really
seriously,
reminded me of.
yeah.
I think I read in the trivia that one of the actors in the dinner scene actually went strictly vegetarian or vegan after this, because after filming this, he couldn't stand like the sight or smell of meat, because it just reminded him of like all that rotting food that they had to put up with.
It does amuse me in a way that basically everybody involved in this film, or involved as an actor in this film, hates it, and many of them hate the director. Like, Edwin, I think his name is Edwin Neal, who played the hitchhiker. He literally, in an interview, he was like, I hate Toby Hooper to this day, and I will fight him if I see him, basically. Which is like, that seems like an overreaction, but at the same time, like, I kind of get it.
Yeah. I mean, 4 or 6 weeks of filming, like, that doesn't seem necessarily terrible, but it probably feels like a lot in like 110-degree heat. So, I wasn't there, so I'll have to take his word for it. I did read that he was actually thanked by Texas state troopers, because since the movie was released, like, crime dropped like 18% apparently. Because like I guess people didn't pick up hitchhikers, and I don't know, maybe people were just nicer to each other and decided not to eat one another. But regardless of what it was, crime dropped like 17 or 18%, significant amount. So
yeah. So we've talked a lot about Leatherface, which obviously is like the enduring icon of the film, but he's far from the only thing that makes the movie scary. Right? So let's talk about some of the other things that they use effectively, excuse me, to really boost that like fear factor.
Well, like you said, like it's not super gory. Like there's maybe a couple shots that, you know, have something in it, but for the most part, like, so I think, I don't know, Ted, kind of like what you were saying with the sound design, like it seemed so intentional and not thoroughly planned out. Like, you know, nowadays, like, you know, we've talked about Fight Club in the past and how with the sound design, you know, with the punches, they actually went down to a basement and they hit giant bags of meat with baseball bats, basically. But like all this seems super intentional, and like they're like, yeah, we're actually going to take our boom mic and, you know, hit something in the room that, you know, these actors are in to create that sound. I don't know, it was just, it sound, it just was so authentic that it was actually like kind of fucking scary.
Well, and even in this, even when there's absence of sound, like even in the silence in the film, it seems very intentional too. And you're just sometimes that can be so uncomfortable, and you're like waiting for something terrible to happen. And I think when films have a lot of silence, it's actually scarier than when they have this like super background like music, or
Yeah,
these sounds of the forest or whatever. um uh so I think that was scary too, because you were like waiting for the other shoe to drop, and
right.
when you can't hear anything, when there isn't any sound, then when there is a sound, then it's amplified. So
Yeah,
I think that that worked well for the film too.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. The thing about this movie that I noticed about halfway through this most recent rewatch is that the only music that I could make out was like the radio,
Yes.
actual
right.
music. There's not
Yeah.
a soundtrack like the typical horror movie soundtrack where it's all like atonal strings and like,
Yes.
somebody comes in with like a crash cymbal or something.
Turn the lights off, carry me home. Oh,
Speaking
oh yeah,
horrifying,
wrong decade.
um, but the sounds that you do have are supposedly, this may be, apocryphal or an urban legend, but supposedly all the sound effects that they tried to model after a slaughterhouse. So like things that
Yeah.
you would hear in a slaughterhouse, which is kind of gross in its own way.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
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 And then when they put it into this film, it's like it's super effective.
Right. Yeah,
Um,
I think like a lot of the ambient noise was like they literally went into a slaughterhouse, like you said, uh and recorded the sounds, like the natural everyday occurring sounds inside a slaughterhouse, and use that as like low key ambient noise, you know, throughout certain points in the movie, just to like, you know, when it starts getting suspenseful, you're like, it's not like that background noise that, or you know, backing music that we're kind of used to. It's something much more raw and visceral that it just makes you really uncomfortable.
Yeah,
yeah, but
definitely. Go ahead.
even some of the like innocuous sounds, like when they're in the house in their grandfather's old house and they're like laughing and carrying on, like you hear that in the distance and it sounds kind of like crying
Yeah.
or like screaming or like these kind of weird moans. Like it doesn't really sound like laughter, even though you see them all together laughing and joking, with the exception of Franklin, who has kind of a shitty moment. But um you know that they're laughing, you've just seen it, but then when it cuts back to him and he's like yelling for his sister and trying to get everybody to pay attention, it doesn't sound like laughter.
Right. Right.
Right.
And then at the beginning, when they're going through the opening, right before John Larroquette, who, it just amuses me that John Larroquette is the uh, narrator. I don't know why that's so funny to me, but it is. Like the guy from Night Court, you know?
I
Oh,
mean,
is that who that is?
Yeah.
Wow.
apparently he was paid in one single marijuana joint.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
Um,
good for him, I guess.
Makes
yeah,
sense.
but as he's doing the narration, or right before the narration starts, when you see all the like flashes of different sites, you hear that weird like sound effect. To me, it sounded like a door, like a really squeaky hinge.
Mhm.
opening, but like distorted in some way, which is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's just great.
Yeah, for sure. I think the scariest noise that I remember from the film is the noisy generator. Like when the couple, they're looking for gas and they see a house and he's like, a generator equals gas. And then you hear the generator. Obviously, you hear it when they're standing right in front of it, but you hear it for a while. And so in the background you have this like super normal sound of a generator, and that's powering all of the things it needs to power in this creepy house. And it almost makes it seem like I don't know, like, oh, I'm safe because I hear the sound of a generator, and
Mhm.
then you're not safe, and then
Right.
you die and all of that. But it just there's something comforting about that, and yet so scary. But I had a reaction like that to the generator. So
No, I mean I can dig that. Like you see that I get where you're coming from, saying the generator seems like it's like a normal thing, right?
yeah,
Like you would expect that, and you think, oh, there's people that live here and they're like me, but it's really also kind of juxtaposed with a lot of weird shit.
right,
Like
right,
he opens up, or he's like, come look at this, and there's just like all these cars
right.
under a tarp or some netting or something to hide them, and you're like, that's a lot of cars. Why are there that
Yeah,
many fucking cars? Like, but I mean, I totally dig what you're saying, and David, I think it was you that brought this up. Sean, I may have been you. If it was, I apologize. But the power of suggestion is super strong in this film. We've talked about this before, probably most notably in the Psycho episode. But like, what you don't see is the scary part,
right,
Right.
because your imagination is like, oh my god, he's getting cut open with a chainsaw. But you don't see, it's not like a lot of other films where they, like I said, the cruelty is the point. They revel in the gore.
yeah,
Mhm.
And it's even worse in that way because you see a movie like um some of the Dead series from Romero, like it's gross, there's pig guts or whatever kind of intestines, but like you see it and it kind of is just like, oh, that's not as bad as I might have imagined it. In this
right,
you're like, holy shit, I'm imagining this, it's fucking awful.
yeah,
Right.
yes,
Yeah. Yeah. On the topic of other things, or things other than Leatherface that are horrifying about this movie, is there's that old recurring movie trope within horror of like the false hope, kind of like in the third act, where the final girl, or the last person standing, thinks they have found like a you know their way out of the mess, out of the shit, and turns out that that person's not going to help them. They're the opposite of what they're looking for. This is something that we've seen in like countless fucking movies over the decades. But this movie like did it so early on and so effectively. When she goes to was it back to that gas station, and she runs into that guy who ends up being part of the family,
hmm,
and she thinks that she's found hope. She's like, oh my god. Of course she's mainly going out of her mind because she was chased around by a psychopath with a fucking chainsaw. But um he uh, he did like an uncomfortably good job, like consoling her at first, making her feel like everything was going to be okay, and it when in fact like it really wasn't going to be okay.
well, yeah, I mean, he brings her a blanket. He's like, I'm gonna go get the car, even though we don't have a phone, so I can't call the police, but I'll get my
Right.
car. And he does. Like, he actually brings the truck, and you're like, damn, this guy is gonna save her. Like, good for him. Now,
Hmm.
obviously, we know better, but there is that moment of, oh, I'm safe, and you kind of believe that maybe she is, which we
Right.
should know better, and
Hmm.
and then she's not. So but I agree with that. I think a lot of movies do that where you think you've made it out of the woods, and then like something else happens, or you think you're being rescued and it's another villain, and or whatever, a cliff or whatever. So yeah, I mean, but that was a really scary moment in the movie.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Like that turn where when you finally figure out that he is not on the side that she was hoping for.
Right? No.
Yeah.
Yes, it's worse now
It is in fact much worse.
because now I'm being beaten with a broom on top of everything else that's happened.
I
Right.
know.
Yeah,
Oh my
like I mean out of all things, like she's beating her with like the bushy end of a broom, and I'm like why? Like that's such an odd yet specific choice.
But the film does a good job of that because one of the points I wanted to make and I touched on earlier is it celebrates the mundane. Like this film
Right.
makes, you know, everything seem terrible and horrific, including a broom. Because, like, not only am I going to get jabbed by this broom, but then I'm going to get beat until I can't even get up and he can tie my hands together. And there's so many scenes like that that just make normal life and normal things in our lives seem really scary and terrifying and deadly, really.
Right, like a chair made out of bones and skin.
Yeah, yeah. Shauna, I think you bring up a really interesting point about the mundane as something to be afraid of in a way in this film. I mean, even when they go and visit the cemetery to check on their grandfather's grave, like everybody is weird there.
Yes.
Like the one guy, they're talking to the old guy, and he's like, "Oh, that's the sheriff," and he's kind of off in some way that you can't really quite put your finger on, but you just feel it like instinctively.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the random Texan just comes over. He's like, "I'm going to borrow your young lady here for a minute," and just drags her off. And I'm just like, "That's a really like that's not a normal thing." So again,
Yeah, I
I don't
think
know if that was the '70s or that was
nah,
just like Texas,
I
charm, so to
it's
speak.
I think it's both. So like, I mean, Ted, I'm glad you brought that back because I was just about to like reiterate what you said earlier about it just being like a product of the 70s. I think it also had to do with the fact that it's probably we know it's like a small town in Texas, it's not huge, so like these people don't talk with like a lot of other people. They occasionally get like someone passing through, but it's not somewhere that you go and like stay or vacation at, so they all talk the same weird accents and weird phrases and stuff to each other on a daily basis for their entire lives. um so yeah, like I guess that's where like colloquialisms come into play, and um but yeah, I think that adds to the oddness, and kind of like what you were saying, just makes it feel off.
Well, and
Right.
it's a real phenomenon like that. I mean, I have driven through Texas. Now, not to bash Texas because I like Texas. I have friends that
Right.
live there. Okay. Now, but I have driven through a couple of places and in Texas that Travis and I were like, oh man, we got to try to make it to the next gas station. Like there is no way
Yeah.
we're stopping here. So there were some of the small towns that just don't get a lot of outsiders. There is an environment that's somewhat similar, and it's why it makes the film so believable because you've just got all these people that maybe a lot of them are related, maybe they're not, but they all grew up together. They have this common oddness or weirdness or whatever you want to call it, and
Right.
it's a real thing. So
Yeah, and I mean, you even notice it when they're at the gas station when he's asking him about an old house, and he's like, "No, I don't know anything about that." And he says, "Oh, well, that's my grandfather's place." And then
right,
he's like, "Oh," kind of like, "Oh, you're one of us in a way.
right, right.
Like you're. It's okay to talk to you. You can, we're all insular, but you can be part of that."
Right.
Right.
I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, this movie really says a lot without having to actually say a lot.
One thing I thought watching it um the other day is, and maybe I'm just kind of fucking weird, but I thought it was
Well, I mean, yes.
funny.
Yeah, kind of funny.
Yeah, like I mean, not obviously it's not like an out and out comedy, but I thought there were some like legitimately like laugh out loud moments, honestly, and I think there's definitely some black humor involved intentionally, but there's some legitimate like comedic bits, in
Yeah.
my opinion.
Yeah, there's a few lines in the van, both before they pick up the hitchhiker and then during, that whole scene where they're in there with him, that are pretty funny. One part that I don't think you're really supposed to laugh at, but the big truck comes by and the dude in a wheelchair is like taking a whiz, and I guess because of the sheer wind force coming off of the
Yeah.
truck, like he falls out of his chair and tumbles down the hill. I'm gonna be that guy, say it's okay that I laugh at that part because I have a brother in a wheelchair. And I'll use that excuse again, like I did for when we talked about Friday the 13th, when the I guess the ex quarterback in the wheelchair gets
Yeah.
a machete to the head, and in the
He goes
wheelchair,
down the stairs.
yeah, backwards down the stairs. There's just something about it that like cracks me up. I guess because it's like it didn't actually happen. Like I'm not gonna laugh at a person, like an actual real life person in a wheelchair fall out of their chair. I'm not gonna laugh at that. But like in a movie setting where I don't know, it's part of what's going on screen. It's one of those weird things where you're like, I guess it's okay to laugh.
Well, and I think it lightens up the mood a little bit, and it relaxes the viewer, the watcher, who and almost to a point where we're like, okay, I'm okay with this situation because it's kind of funny and yada yada. And then something terrible happens, and you can be caught off guard again. But I think that the humor is definitely there, and I think it's intentional to probably for a lot of reasons, but partly at least to relax us enough to prepare us for something else, because if it's all tension and seriousness, it's not going to have the same effect.
Yeah, there are some really great like one-liners in this, in my opinion. When they're in the van talking about the head cheese, and one of the women is like, "Oh, gross! I don't want to hear about that." And they're like, "Well, you might like it if you didn't know what was in it." Like
Yeah.
that line, it just hit right. I don't know. That fucking cracked me up. Um, when they're talking about the house, and he says, "This looks like the birthplace of Bela Lugosi." That one got a good chuckle. And then when he's talking to Franklin about the guy, Franklin's nervous, saying, "You don't think he could follow us?" And the other guy's like, "Oh no, I told him where you live. I gave him your address. Hell, I gave him your zip code. He's gonna kill you."
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
I was
Yeah,
just
Exactly.
like, that is such a like that is how male friends talk to one another. I was like, that is a
right,
perfect like joke among guy friends, and not
right,
to
yeah,
say women don't have similar senses of humor, but like that is 100% how I talk to my guy friends.
yeah. Like there's whatever the opposite of sarcasm is, it doesn't exist in dudes interchanging. Like everything is caked on some
Yeah,
level of sarcasm. It's just part of our language. With
it be like that, as they
yeah,
say.
right. Uh, I mean,
Yeah,
that legit is something that, like, I feel like I would say, or maybe Ted would say to me and be like, "Oh no, I gave that guy your fucking address. You're dead, buddy."
yeah. Like I don't know how else to explain it. Like that is literally something I would say to one of my buddies.
Well,
Right.
yeah, and it makes it relatable, right? I mean, you hear that and you're like, "Oh, I would totally say that."
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that goes back into like making good characters and believable characters, because
Right.
they're working on a budget with a bunch of no name actors. Like you have to get in where you can.
Yeah.
Shauna, I think this was you that brought this up earlier to kind of shift gears again. There's a lot of really great arty shots in this film.
Yes.
Right.
Correct.
That's it. That's all we're going to say about it. That's it.
That's it, folks. Debba debba debba.
But I mean,
Look, yeah, we can, and this goes back to the hillbilly horror genre, officially or non-officially, unofficially, but we think like, oh, they're just these dumb inbred, whatever, cannibals. And there's such an artistic point of view to all of it. And I think it I mean, there's not only are there great shots, art shots, um, with the camera, right? But then in the house and the way that they have it all set up. And I think were you talking about camera angle shots? Because there's a lot of that too.
Yeah, I was mostly talking about like cinematography and lighting, but I mean, hey, you're running with it. Run with it, sister.
Well, I just think it elevates the film a little bit to have that artistic element, so that it's not just a film about a bunch of hicks who do all these terrible things to people just because they're stupid and don't know anything else to do, don't have anything else to do. So, but I think the cinematography was pretty phenomenal as well. And I know that there were some shots that I think I read somewhere that they were gonna cut out, or that were cut out. Like for instance, there's a shot of not Sally, but the other girl who dies first.
Mm,
Uh, yeah,
doesn't
that
matter.
girl.
She's dead. Go on.
She's walking up to the house, and you see her backside, and it's just a cool shot, and it's from the ground up.
Yes,
Yeah,
under
I
the
actually,
swing.
yeah, I
Yes.
remember that shot.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that shot fucking rules.
I
yeah,
mean, and it's amazing, and it's actually, like, a really cool shot, and I thought I read somewhere where somebody didn't wanna put that in. Like, I don't know if it was the studio that didn't want it in, or I think the director, I think he might have insisted that it was there, but there were some very stylized shots that, I thought were pretty amazing and impactful, and I think they almost didn't make it in the film, so
yeah.
Yeah.
I think that was a big point of contention with this movie, right? Is that it went over the top with so many different aspects of what it was doing or trying to do, that like it didn't even get released in several countries because of the very nature of it. And yeah, I know he fought tooth and nail with like the ratings people and
Right,
all
right.
that like said this is like beyond R or NC-17 or whatever, like we this can't
X.
even be a thing. Yeah.
They wanted to rate it X, which is doubly amusing because one of the reasons he didn't have a lot of gore in the film is because he was like, I think we can get a PG rating because an
Right,
R rating is like a death knell, basically. Like
right.
it's very hard to make money as an R rated film because it cuts out so much of your potential audience.
Right.
You know, that's why so many films barely eke by with a PG-13 is because like, you can get the teenage crowd and you get kids in, but it's like, dude, you're making a movie about people who cut up people with chainsaws and eat them. Like, you're fucked. There's no way this is not an R-rated film.
Right. Yeah, it's just I don't know, this movie has a lot of cool history to it, you know, from the cinematography aspect to, you know, the whole setup and the longevity of the you know, shooting dates and how it really wasn't that long of a time period. I don't know. This movie just has a lot going for it. And
Yeah, it also has one of my favorite sequences in any horror film at the end where I call it the chainsaw dance.
Oh.
It's
sure,
not really a dance necessarily, but it's just like
it does kind of look like a waltz almost.
Oh,
right, but
100%, or a
it's kind of like
ballet.
weirdly in time, right? And
Yeah.
it's just like Leatherface venting his frustrations because he can't do it verbally, really, other than just like shouts.
Hmm.
Um, but it's just like it's shot so beautifully with the light and the sunspots. It's just like, man, if this were not about a masked killer with a chainsaw, this would be like lovely, right? Like,
Right.
and there's just
Definitely.
enough of that throughout the whole film where the cinematography just hits a little different. And you're like, man, this is like, it's not like your typical low budget horror movie where it's like a bunch of people got together and were like, we really like horror, let's do that. It's like Toby Hooper, like, there's something here. You know what I mean? Like, there's
Yeah.
a little bit of talent here, or maybe a lot of talent. You know, not to be dismissive, but there's some level of talent here beyond just like point camera, you're dead, point camera, you're dead. You know?
Right.
It's very stylized, and I think, probably went underappreciated, um,
Oh yeah.
by much of its
100%.
audience, because most people are gonna watch the film, and they're gonna just focus on the scare factor and the scare tactics, and they're not gonna look at it necessarily the way that he probably meant it to be watched, so but I agree with you. I mean, you almost kinda want, like, that person that took Sally away to just like turn around and bring her back. Just so, because his like dancing partner is gone. I mean, it's tragic at the end.
Yeah. It does have that like very contradicting feel to it where like, the final girl got away. Yes. And of course she's, will be traumatized for life.
Yeah.
But like, at the same time, there's, it's, you don't just get a point of view shot from her in the back of the truck, like as she's driving further and further away from Leatherface, and he's just like standing there, and you're like, oh, like, her and you as an audience can like collectively take a deep breath and be like, okay, it's the end of the movie. This is, prototypical. It's what I'm used to. This is my comfort place. Everything comes back to normal at the end. But like, you just see him like doing this weird ass dance, swinging this fucking chainsaw like it's a hot dog, and you're just like, what the fuck is going on here?
Yeah, I mean, that's his art though. Like that's his thing, right? Like that's how
Right.
he expresses himself. And I'm sure he saw it as like extreme failure
Right. Yeah. I
because,
mean, like,
you don't let him get away. I mean, that's not what you do when you're Leatherface. Like you can't just
right.
let people escape.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Leatherface doesn't let her face the music. Oh, god damn it. Oh, wow.
Wow.
Okay. I have not heard anything from Ted, which means that he decided to cancel himself from the podcast.
Yes. Wise decision. No, I mean, I kind of hit all the points I wanted to hit. I have a couple of closing thoughts, but in terms of like things to discuss about the film, I've kind of said my piece. I don't know if you all have anything else you want to go over that
No, for sure.
we can hit, or
I'm good.
y'all.
Shauna?
I feel like I've gotten a lot in. Thank you.
Yeah, that's good. We always feel like I mean, Ted and I were used to like the two of us like battling it out, but when we have some like a guest, or in this case, a nerd on retainer, we be like, oh yeah, there's someone else here, like we should probably shut the fuck up.
Right. I'm always worried we're gonna get canceled on the Twitter.
Right.
It's like they didn't let the woman talk.
Right. Like, first of all, you do a DC episode talking about all the upcoming DC stuff, and you don't
and forget about Wonder Woman completely.
You don't talk about fucking Wonder Woman, you dipshits.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I told Ted about that the next day. I was like, we forgot to talk about Wonder Woman.
Basically,
and it was in our notes.
Fear in life is being canceled for some innocuous thing that we did because we're morons.
In no way intentional.
Just... Yeah, that would be very on par with our brand, though. And me, and just my life in general, is getting fucked over by my own ignorance.
Actually, that's not true. My greatest fear in life is the Dutch, but that's not here nor there.
I thought you were about to say the Ducks.
I mean,
oh man. Well, those two, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, those ducks can be pretty scary, man.
Yeah. All right. So, final thoughts. Shauna, go.
You have to see it if you haven't seen it.
I mean, if you made it this far into the podcast and you haven't seen it, like, basically just
die.
That's dramatic, but
no, I mean, yeah, and you have to watch it through our eyes. Of
what
course.
did I just say about getting canceled for something innocuous?
No, this is so fun. I just have to say, I'm so glad we're talking about this movie, because I feel like a lot of the movies from the 70s and especially the 80s are discredited for being out of touch with and unrelatable. And that's just not the case. And so I can totally relate to the characters in this film. And
right.
I thought it's a good one. So
yeah, I think that's I think you touched on something really interesting there, because it seems like lately in the last handful of years we've had a resurgence of like quote unquote intelligent horror.
right.
And I don't want to single any of these movies or directors out because I enjoy a lot of them, but like stuff like Hereditary and The Witch and Midsommar, they're getting bandied about as like horror for intelligent people. And, I consider myself pretty intelligent, but I would rather watch like some schlocky movie like from Herschel Gordon Lewis a lot of the time, like Blood Feast,
Yeah.
where it's like there's no plot, nobody can act, but wow, look at all that cool shit. Um, and I think that a lot of these movies like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, maybe not it specifically, but a lot of movies from the 70s and 80s, like you said, kind of are looked down on. And I think in a lot of ways, horror has not ever gotten a lot of respect as I don't think it's ever really been treated like a respectable genre.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So I think you touched on something really, really true there.
Like I said, it took me another go around with this movie to both appreciate it and personally enjoy it. And kind of what you were saying about horror being underappreciated, it made me really like that was the first like you verbalized that feeling or thought that I had in my head, but I couldn't verbalize myself, and I was like, that's really the case because like in one genre, the horror genre, you have movies like Herschel Gordon Lewis's films or you know Ari Aster's films, like they look pretty different, but they all fall under the same genre. And to be able to have that kind of range and reach within like your medium and still be classified as horror is pretty damn incredible to me. Um, and I think this movie is just another installment in one of those amazing underappreciated subgenres. So yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Right on. All right, so that was the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Not literally, one hopes, but the movie at least.
Our thoughts on the film.
Yes, our thoughts on the film. We're not psycho murderers.
Yes, we don't want to make people lampshades.
Once again, I do not want to be canceled for something that is not true.
Right.
There are plenty of things to cancel me about that I'm actually guilty of. So
Yes.
this is not one of them. As we always do around this time, it is time for our recommendations called shit that does not suck. Or I guess since it's plural, shit that do not suck, shits that do not suck. None of this matters. Shauna, have you seen or watched or read or partaken in anything recently that you would like to recommend to our listeners?
Yes. And this recommendation actually originally comes from Dave. And it's
Mm.
Marianne.
Oh, okay.
The Netflix, well, it was on Netflix. I'm not so sure it is right now, but
Yeah, it
it was
is.
a
It's
Netflix series.
yeah, it's still in my queue. So
Pretty amazing, actually. And it's about a writer, and she kind of goes back to her hometown, and a lot of stuff happens. And it was fantastic. So I recommend it especially if you're a writer, and especially if you like a good series. I got through it very quickly.
yeah, you
Because it
did.
was so addicting. And I enjoyed each episode. So highly recommend. And thank you, Dave, for telling me about it.
Yeah, I was kind of pissed that you like surpassed me. Usually, like it takes you forever to get around to watching something that I've recommended. I mean, I totally understand because you and we both have lives and families, and so sometimes it takes a while to get to something. But like when you texted me back like 2 days later and you're like, I finished it, and I was like, I'm on episode 3.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's still where I'm at right now is like maybe 3 or 4, and it's hit kind of a lull. I feel like it started out really strong and pretty scary, and then like nothing's really happening now, so I'm not sure if it like ramps back up again.
It
Uh,
does.
okay.
Yeah, it does. I sometimes I get lost in a series, like, oh, this is silly or stupid, by
Mm,
episode whatever. But I mean, I just watched it all the way through because I just felt like it was that good.
okay.
But it does go up and down.
Cool.
So
Yeah.
there will be an up.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. So for my shit that doesn't suck, I am gonna recommend The Haunting at Bly Manor. So, of course, this is one of the most anticipated Netflix series. Not really a season 2; it's more of a part 2 or second outing of a anthology series. Um, and of course, its original and predecessor was The Haunting of Hill House.
Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't
Um,
realize that.
hmm So yeah, it's by the same writer and writing team as The Haunting of Hill House. It's Mike Flanagan. He also, Shauna, you've seen Gerald's Game, right? The movie.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Okay, he directed Gerald's Game.
Okay.
So they definitely have like a that dreamy kind of like hazy feel to it.
Right. Right.
It's that kind of horror, but uh, I mean, Haunting of Hill House came incredibly recommended by so many different people that enjoy different subgenres of horror. And what I'm hearing on social media, like right now, or talking to friends, it's a little bit more polarizing. This second part than The Haunting of Hill House. Bly
Interesting.
Manor, yeah, it's. I mean, and of course, I'm not going to spoil anything, and I don't want to give too much away, but yeah, it does seem like. I mean, overwhelmingly, the reviews and reactions have been positive, including mine myself, which is. Of course, that makes sense. I'm recommending it, but it definitely seems a little bit more polarizing than the first season, which was pretty unanimously decided that it was good. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. Hit a lot of emotional notes where I'll be honest, I was a little bitch and I cried my fucking eyes out.
Wow.
So yeah, it's pretty up there in terms of like emotional horror, like that really gets that reaction out of you. So yeah, I definitely recommend it.
Cool.
All right, right on. Excuse me. My shit that doesn't suck this week is the 2018 reboot sequel of Halloween.
Ooh, you
Yeah,
finally watched it.
yeah, I did. I got around to it. I don't think it's nearly as good as the original, but what is?
Mm-hmm.
I think that it is definitely worth a watch, though. No spoilers. I think it's a pretty good update. It's got some parts of it I didn't like, but overall, I found myself enjoying it. So, kind of half-hearted shit that doesn't suck, I guess. But tis a season, and Michael Myers fucking rules. He should have won the poll. That's my hot take.
Yeah, he definitely should have won the poll.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, that one it was, of course, a close race and deservedly so. Like they're both beloved horror villains, so it for sure shouldn't have been a landslide. And I think at the end of the day, like I think I just closed my eyes and pointed my mouse clicker and clicked on one of them, and then opened my eyes and I was like, all right, well, I guess I voted for Jason. So
All right.
um,
Well, Shauna, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
yes,
It
you.
was a pleasure as
Thanks.
always.
yeah,
You
thank.
brought
Absolutely.
some much needed intelligence to the
Yeah,
show, so we are appreciative of that.
Thank you.
All right. So, a few ways that you can support the podcast. Social media. We're on all of them.
yes,
We hate them, but they are helpful for us. We do in fact enjoy actually the Facebook group Geek Garage Podcast Fans and Listeners that has all the polls that we were talking about earlier. That is the best way to stay up to date with the podcast and interact with us. Like I said, we do a lot of polls on there. David is pretty active on there. I don't participate. So, like I said, that is the Facebook group, Geek Garage Podcast Fans and Listeners. Follow the link in our podcast description if you'd like to join that group or see us on any of the other social media platforms like Twitter or Instagram. You can support the show in various ways other than social media. Some of those are easier and cheaper than others. You can subscribe to the podcast if you have not already. We are on like 400 different fucking sites. I don't know what all of
yeah,
them are. You can figure it out. Go to
it's
your
a lot.
preferred one. We're probably there. That is if you have not subscribed already, but all of you have because for some reason you like us. You can leave us a rating on review on Apple Podcasts or one of the few other sites or streaming services that allow that. If you would like to support the show that way, we do not accept anything but 1-star or 5-star reviews. None of this middle of the road bullshit. It's love or hate only. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to write us a shitty review too, be like, these guys fucking suck. Be like, fair.
Yes.
Understandable.
But make it good, okay?
Right. Be creative.
Don't just be 1-star losers or lame. Like, be creative. We appreciate creative insults here at the Geek Garage. If you would like to support the show in ways that do cost you money, we have a Patreon.
Yes.
I don't know why, but it's there.
$2 hairs and $5 hairs.
Yes. Very cheap or relatively cheap, I suppose. You could get a cup of coffee or Coke or donate to our podcast. I know which one I would do, and I'm not telling you. But donors do get neat perks like cool button and sticker sets, their name on our wall of shame. No, I'm sorry. That says wall of donors. I misread that.
Yeah,
that is on the Geek Garage site, and weekly updates. So you do get some cool perks, as well as, you can tell people that you support us. And actually, don't tell people you do that.
No, please do. Like, spread the word. That's how people find out about podcasts, is other people talking about them.
Agree to disagree. But you can follow the link in our podcast description if you're interested in becoming a supporter that way. I think that's all we have. David, hit him with the line.
Be kind, stay geeky, and eat lots of cheesecake. And thank you again, Shauna.
Thank you.
Notice he said cheesecake, listeners, and not people you cut up with a chainsaw.
Yes, that's a very important.
I cannot stress that enough.
Yes.
We do not support chainsaw murder.
No, not that one at least.
Chainsaw Massacre, however, we can talk. Have a great week, everybody.
Bye.